amendments. Adding organic matter to clay and sand can help with nutrient holding capacity, improve drainage, and reduce compaction. There's some quick fixes that people will try, but they don't work. Don't add to topsoil because you don't know what you're getting. It might be, it looks like topsoil, but maybe it's mostly sand. You don't know that. You haven't had that soil analyzed. It might be full of diseased material. It might be full of some kind of chemical you don't want in your yard or your garden. And don't add sand or peat moss to clay soil because what happens, it just tightens the soil up. The thing you want to add is organic matter or compost. And you're going to have to do it for several years in a row. And the area that you're working with, you want to minimize that compaction. So don't be walking on it. Don't till the soil when it's wet or water is standing. Remember, compost, compost, compost. Incorporate your organic matter or your compost into the top 6 inches to 2 feet. Now, if you've got a really bad problem soil, it's going to take you a while to accomplish this. Compost provides airspace and microbes. Okay, if you don't know what kind of soil you have prior to doing a soil test, this is just a little quickie thing you can do to see what you have. Soil is a medium composed of soil particles, organic matter, air, water, and living organism. And all of those things are important to the overall health of the soil and the plants that grow in it. The 3 primary particles are sand, silt, and clay. And the relative percentages of these components present make up the soil's texture. Okay, so to do our little test, it's very simple. You can do it at home with materials that you have. You'll need a straight-sided clear jar. That means a jar that the sides of it go straight up and down. There's no collar at the top. A permanent marker such as a Sharpie, a ruler for measurement, a watch or stopwatch, a tablespoon of powdered dishwashing detergent, and that's very important. You have to use the powdered one because of the surfactants in it that stick to the soil particles to make this test work. And then you'll need a mesh or sieve for pushing your soil through to make it loose. Okay, you're going to take your jar and you're going to put your soil in it, and you're going to put it about 1/3 full. Now you're going to add your water, and you're going to leave a little bit of headspace at the top. And you can see the lid and the ring is to the side. I mean, if you've got a straight up and down mayonnaise jar, that's fine. But you just need to be sure that the sides of the jar are straight up and down and there's no collar. Okay, now you're going to add your powdered dishwashing detergent. You're going to put your lid and your ring on, tighten it up real good, and then just shake it. Shake it, baby, shake it. You're going to make it into a slurry. Now you're going to set it down on your countertop, and you're going to time it for 1 minute. At the end of 1 minute, put a black mark where that division is. You can see a good difference here and 2 different layers of stuff going on. Now you're going to leave the jar right where it is for 2 hours. And then you're going to mark your jar again. This is your silt layer. Now you're going to leave your jar where it is and leave it setting for 2 days or 48 hours. Then you're going to mark it again. This is your clay layer. So remember, sand, silt, and clay, which is what your soil's made of. Now you're going to use a ruler, and you're going to measure all of these things. You're going to measure the height, and then the total height of all 3 layers. And then the next slide, I'm going to show you a form you can use that'll make life easier. So you put in the heights of all your layers in inches or centimeters if you prefer. Get your total height, and then figure out your percentage. And all you've got to do your percentage is take your inches times 100, and that'll give you your percentage. Now, here's where the magic comes in. You can tell what kind of soil you've got. Okay, we're going to use, this is called a soil textural triangle. And once you do this test, you can get a really good idea of what kind of soil you have. Now, this is an ideal soil. It is a loam. So take your information off of your form, and you are going to go across the middle, which is the red line. That's going to show you where your clay line is. Next, you're going to do your silt. That's your green line, and that will go from upper right down to the bottom. Then the last one is your sand percentage, and that's the blue line, and that will go from upper left down to the bottom. Where those three lines intersect will land you in one of those little diagrams, and you can figure out, hey, I've got loam soil, so this is ideal. Not everybody's going to have that, so that's why you need to compost. Okay, organic matter. Let's talk about that a little bit. Use organic matter and improve your soil. There's an easy way to do that. Just make some compost. Organic matter is the glue that helps form soil aggregates. And aggregates is where the parts and pieces start binding together, and you actually have soil that you can stick your hand down in, and it'll be a little bit fluffy and clumpy. If you don't have organic matter, the individual pieces of sand, silt, and clay are just laying there. By adding the organic matter, you form the aggregates of soil that allow for air and water space. So you know you've got to have the air and you've got to have the water in the soil, and that organic matter is going to open that up a little bit and give it a place to go. In sandy soil, organic matter occupies some of the space between the sand grains. This binds the sand grains together and increases the water holding capacity. Because you know, sand, if you pour water in it, it'll just zip right through. But if you add some organic matter, it's going to slow that down. In fine textured clay soils, organic matter creates aggregates of soil particles. This allows the water to move more rapidly around the soil particles. The digested and composting organic matter also helps develop good air and water relationships. Okay, clay is a really tight thing, so you add that organic matter, it gives you some air space, and it will allow the water to drain more rapidly. Organic matter, compost, cover crops, manure, the remains of plants. If you're going to make compost, I think Miss Susan's going to talk about that some, but you need to research that a little bit. It's not a hard thing to do, but it is such a good thing for your soil. Earthworms, insects, bacteria, fungi, and animals use organic matter as food, breaking it down to obtain energy and essential nutrients. The byproduct of that decomposition is the humus, which is what you're after. This remains in the soil, and it does the magical binding of the sand and clay particles to form soil aggregates. So you got to put that air in there for the water to drain or for it to hold some water. Now, soil tests are really important. It's provided by the NC Department of Agriculture. The lab is located in Raleigh, and that's real convenient for us. You can get boxes and forms and packaging samples available at any extension center. Don't use the home soil tests because they're very inaccurate. Now, here in Harnett County, we actually have a little cabinet right outside of our door that's got your boxes, it's got your paperwork, everything you need. You can come pick those up, and then you can bring them back, and we can take them to Raleigh for you, or you can take them yourself. Here's what a soil test can tell you. How much nutrient do you need to add to your soil to support healthy growth? Can it be applied natural or synthetic? If your nutrient levels are too high, what your soil pH is. Is it acidic or is it alkaline? Do you need lime? How much do you need? You can measure the acidic or alkalinity of the soil. Ideally, it is 5.5 to 6.5. which is what most plants like, and the microbes love it. Our Piedmont soils are typically acidic. And if you've got soil, if you bought a new house and got soil that the pH comes back way too high, then you're going to have to work on that too. Soil testing will not analyze drainage issues nor soil compaction. And both are very common and serious problems in some of the newer housing developments, because you've had vehicles running all over the yard and the soil being pushed around and it's gotten compacted. Now, your soil test won't tell you why your plant died unless your nutrient is salt related. It won't tell you if there's any diseases that are present in the soil. It won't tell you if there are pesticide or chemical residues in the soil. And it does not tell you directly how to amend your soil, but it will give you some recommendations. You want to sample at least 2 to 3 months before you start any gardening project. So if you're planning on doing a spring garden, now's the time to do it for next year. It takes time to change your soil pH because lime has to be incorporated into the soil and it has to have time to break down and work. Some nutrients do need to be incorporated before you can use your garden. You want to submit your samples April through October to avoid delays common during the busy winter season. Okay, there's no charge for samples that are submitted April through October. So our window is quickly closing, so you need to get it done before October. If you choose to wait and do it between December and March, there will be a sample fee of $4 per box. And this is free, so take advantage of it. Your clay soils need to be sampled every 3 to 4 years. Your sandy soils every 2 to 3 years. And if you do apply any lime or fertilizer, or you know that has happened recently, you need to wait 6 to 8 weeks before collecting your samples. And avoid sampling wet soils, let it dry out. Now there's tools you'll need to use. They're not anything expensive, but you probably have most of them around your house. Use your appropriate tools, such as a garden probe, a garden spade, a garden trowel, or a shovel. That's what you want to take your sample with and put it in a clean plastic bucket, sand bucket, Tupperware, something like that. Now, when you sample, you don't want to take just a sample. You want to decide, okay, I'm going to put my vegetable garden, I'm going to have a back lawn, I'm going to have a front lawn, then I'm going to have a flower bed, and then I've got a bed that's got nothing but trees and shrubs in it. And you need to kind of say, okay, vegetable garden's going to be number 1, front lawn's going to be number 2, something that you can remember how you have designated your areas. You need to identify the unique areas you wish to fertilize or amend. Your unique area should represent only one soil type and type planting, like a lawn or trees and shrubs or vegetables or fruit trees. You can take as many samples as you want to. It doesn't matter. Anytime you notice a difference in your soil, like maybe you look at a vegetable bed and part of it is really dark and the other part of it's really light, that's important to get a mix of those soils for that sample. For each unique area, collect at least 6 to 8 samples. And if you look at the diagram, you can see where they zigzag back and forth all over the place. And that's how you get a good representative sample. If you're doing raised beds, you want to do 3 to 4 samples per raised bed, because you normally have soil that is brought in from the outside for your raised beds. Combine all those little cores that you get in that bucket, stir them up real good, and then you'll take your sample from what's in the bucket. Okay, to collect your cores or your little samples, if you're doing it in your lawn, you want to avoid the thatch. If you're doing it in a bed, you want to avoid the mulch. So just dig that back a little bit and then take a slice that's about 4 inches down. In turf, you want to do 4 inches, landscape bed, vegetable beds, 4 to 6 inches. And then once again, mix them up really good. If they're wet, let them dry a little bit. And then look at your box, because there's a big red line on it. You want to fill that mixture in that box up to the red line. Don't put a plastic bag in there, anything else. Just put the box together and put the soil in. And you want to use 1 box per area that you've decided on. You're going to label the box real good, put your name and address, and make up a sample ID number or letter. You can do up to 5 letters or numbers. That'll help you remember. What I did when I took my samples, I wrote down front lawn and gave it a code, back lawn, gave it a code, flower bed, gave it a code, vegetable bed, gave it a code. And that way I could keep up with it when it came back to be sure that I had the right thing. Make sure, once again, make sure you're filled to the red line and close the box flaps. Never take the box closed, because at the soil lab, they're just going to rip those boxes open, and that will save them time if they don't have to deal with tape. And once again, do not put soil in a bag. You can just take those boxes, put them in a grocery bag, put your paper in there with them, and bring them up here and put them in our box, and we'll get them to the lab for you. The turnaround time on samples. Most of the year, the samples are analyzed within 1 week after they arrive at the lab. During the winter season, which is October through February, thousands of samples arrive at once, and sample turnaround may take several weeks, and that's when you have to pay for it. So remember, do it the time of the year you don't have to pay for it. You'll get your results quicker. Now, all your results are going to come via email. So when you fill your forms out, make sure you remember how you put your name down. And if you have any problem with locating your sample, you give us a call up here. And right now it's kind of sketchy how quickly we can get back to you, but we'll get back to you and we can help you look it up. And be sure you check your junk mail folder, because sometimes the results will go in there. Now, this is what a soil report looks like. It's kind of hard to figure it out, but you just have to look at it and break it down in little pieces. And we can help you interpret this also if you have questions about it. You have a sample ID that you've put for your bed, and you also tell them what crop you're growing. Is it going to be a flower garden? Is it going to be a vegetable garden, lawn, that type of thing? Then you'll have your pH and nutrient levels that are in your soil. And these little bar graphs on here, if you look at them, it shows you where the optimum range is. So you know that for this particular soil sample that was taken, the soil is a little bit acidic, so you might need to add something, and that's on this paper. It also gives you the lime and fertilizer recommendations. If you look midway of the page, it'll say lime recommendation, and then it'll say NPK fertilizer recommendations. N is nitrogen, P is phosphorus, and K is potassium. Now you see here it says under lime recommendations, they want you to put 55 pounds per 1,000 square feet. We're going to have to break that down, because when they do the samples, they gear it towards farming. So here we're going to break it down. Okay, it tells you how many pounds of lime you need. And we're going to take the bed that this sample was for, and we're going to figure out how many square feet we have. So let's say we have a vegetable garden, and it's roughly 10 by 14. Okay, we'll take that and we will put that into square feet. Now, mixed fertilizer, they'll give you a recommendation for that. It means it has some combination of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. In this particular case, they are recommending that you get a blend of 15% nitrogen, 0% phosphorus, and 14% potassium. So when you go to the store to buy your fertilizer, you tell them that I want 15, 0, 14, and the store will know exactly what you're talking about, because there's all kinds of different formulations for fertilizer, and you want to make sure that you're not going to get the wrong thing and mess everything up. Your soil report will give you that formulation. And as I said, we're looking at 15, 0, 14. Okay, here's how to determine how much lime or fertilizer you need. You took a rough estimate of your garden area, and it's 10 by 14. So you say 10 times 14, that's 140 square feet. Well, we know that's less than 1,000 square feet, so we've got to figure out how much less. So you divide that, take your 140 and divide it by 1,000. That gives you 0.14. Now, that's for your fertilizer. So 0.14 times 7 pounds, which is what they recommended per 1,000 square feet. So you're saying this is my area of 0.14 and I want 7 pounds. And then I come out and multiply those together and I come out with 0.98. So just round it off to a pound, make life easy. Same thing with your lime. You do the 10 by 14 bed and they want 55 pounds per 1,000 square feet. So you say 0.14 times 55 and that gives you 7.7 pounds, or round it off to 8. Now, if you have an oddly shaped bed, don't panic. Just say, okay, it looks like it's 10 by 14 or it's 12 by 5 or something like that. And then that's your recommended dosage. 1 pound of mixed 15-0-14 of the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium fertilizer, and then 8 pounds of lime for this one bed. Okay, in most cases, soil tests don't measure nitrogen because nitrogen does not persist in the soil for very long. Soil reports provide a recommendation based on the known requirements for the crops. So if you grow a field of corn as opposed to a bed of black-eyed Susans, there's going to be a different requirement. And they'll always give you suggested application rates based on field research that's been done, so you know what to do. Now, your soil report's not going to tell you if you've got drainage issues or you've got soil compaction, and both of those can affect plant growth. But the way to correct that, compost, add organic matter. This is a chart that shows the best growing range pH-wise for all the nutrients that your plants need. So what we're aiming for is between 6 and 6.5. That's where the best uptake is. Now we're going to talk about the GIS. That is a geographical information system that Harnett County has, and you can get a lot of information about the soil on your property from this GIS. And the website for that is gisharnett.org. And these are the steps to go through, but I'm going to show you a slide that goes through each one of these. Okay, when you open it up, here's what the page is going to look like. And you want to choose tax parcel, which is on the left. Tax parcel GIS viewer. Then it pulls up tax parcel, and a GIS mapping. Then you're going to get a window or a page that shows up with some windows on it. And over on the left, it says search all. So put your address in that box. That is going to get you to your property. Okay, this is my property, and I put in 800 North General Lee Avenue in Dunn. You can get a bird's eye view of your property. You get the property lines, you can see your house, you can see your driveway, you can see any trees you've got. And it may not be real current, so at this point in time, our yard looks very different from this. Now, over on the right side, there's an information box, and it's going to give you, that's where you're going to get your information from. It's going to tell you who your owners are. It's going to give a mailing address. It's going to tell you what kind of property it is, what all is involved on that property, such as what you're listed in the tax book, how much acreage you have, how are you zoned. So I know that I've got 0.69 acres. And it indicates whether you're on a wetland or not. I'm not on a wetland. Am I in a flood zone? No, I have minimal flood risk. And then below that, you're going to get a soil analysis document. And don't go into that yet, unless you want to do a lot more research, because it's kind of technical. It also tells you right below soil analysis exactly what kind of soil you have. So I know that I have Norfolk urban and I also have Rains urban, and they tend to group like soils together. It indicates how much your elevation is, what's your highest elevation on your lot, your lowest elevation on your lot, and it'll give you a variance and also an average. And it'll tell you if you're in a voluntary agricultural district, which I am not. Now here's what the soil survey cover looks like. And this, once again, gets very technical, but if you know your soil types, you can go into this and it will tell you even more. Like I said, it groups them together, and I know I have Norfolk Rains, so this gives me some real general information. Now we're getting a little more detailed. I've gone into the Norfolk information. By reading the description, I can determine if I have a problem with drainage, permeability, and how deep my topsoil and subsoil will be. So that's very important. If you have a real shallow topsoil, you're going to have to work with that. Norfolk soil is well drained, and the topsoil is about, 7 inches thick, and it's brown and loamy. So this is good. The soil between the topsoil and the subsoil, the next layer, is a light yellowish. So that kind of indicates I might have a little bit of clay involved there. And my subsoil extends to a depth of 80 inches. So that's pretty deep. It tells you the colors. The upper part of the subsoil is brown, yellow, sandy loam. And the next part is yellowish brown, and then strong brown. Now, the reason they're giving you colors is because there's this book that was used when they did these soil surveys years ago, and that is how they determined what kind of soil it was, by the colors. And you have this book that's got little holes punched in it, and there's colors on there, and you take your soil and line it up, find out what that color is, and it will tell you what your soil is. I'm sure it's much more technical now. You probably can get computer programs that will do this for you, but that's old school how we used to do it. Okay, it also tells me I have a seasonal high water table at a depth of 4 to 6 feet from January through March during most years. It tells me that the soil is not well suited for farming, but it is very well suited for gardens, vegetable crops, trees, and shrubs. So that's good. It's well suited to urban and recreational uses. I'm in a very old subdivision, and the walking trail between Dunn and Irwin is very close by. There can be a wetness limitation, and I have noticed we have a problem. We're trying to work on that now because our house was built in the late 40s, and the way they constructed houses, then they dug a hole and then they built the foundation in it. That has changed, and now they dig a footing on top and put the foundation in that. So I have a little bit of problem with water collecting under my house if we have a really big rainstorm. And I do have 2 different kinds of soil on my property, but I don't know which one is which, and I can't really tell where there's a big difference. So that's something, if you have that situation, you need to take that into account. To the east of us, this is a map of Harnett County. To the east of us, we have sand. To the south of us, we have sand. To the west of us, we have sand and clay. And to the north, we have sand and clay. So you can see how we're kind of getting a blend here of sand and clay. So we have stuff coming in from the mountains and stuff coming in from the ocean. That form the parent material, and that's why our soil is the way it is. Now, in this area, we tend to switch over from Piedmont to coastal plain. And in Dunn, we are predominantly sand, so I do have a sandy soil. And just think, we're headed to the coast, so that's what happens. And I ask you to hold your questions to the very end, because I think that's what Selena wants to do, is do all the questions in. Use the chat box if you have a question, and then we'll come back to it when all the presentations are done. Okay. Miss Susan is next, is that right? No.
Joan.
Miss Joan is next. Do I need to mute?
Stop sharing.
Okay.
Okay, so you close your screen, Sabrina.
Yes, ma'am.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Joan. I don't even know how long I've been with Master Gardeners, that long. And a frog just moved into my throat, sorry. Sabrina, great stuff on the soil. Every time I listen to this, I learn something new. And most significant for me is what's not included in the soil test. A lot there to keep an eye on. Okay, so I need to is my screen showing for everybody? I hope so. No one confirmed that you can hear me? And the screen is on?
It's on, I see it.
Thank you very much. Okay, so my section of this, which is taken directly from the Handbook for Master Gardeners, which, by the way, you can access online. And what I'm going to handle is the garden journal. The question is, should you keep a garden journal? Well, sure you should. And in fact, there are 7 ideas that you can include in your garden journal. So the first thing to include would be site characteristics, and that would be the land before you're planting it. And of course, keeping in mind everything about soil that Sabrina talked about, you're also going to locate where north is and track the sun or shade patterns on your property. You're going to attach a soil report, any slope, drainage, predominant winds, tree roots, anything of note on your property. Also document when you are making any soil amendments, adding fertilizer, what it was you used, how much, when you applied it. You may also consider that when you purchase the home, you receive a plat plan, which you might use, and also, of course, that wonderful GIS map available free online for your county. Here's an example from my property. What I did in August is I took a picture of the backyard. That's my sun at 10 a.m. facing east. To the left is what it looks like at noon, and I am in full blazing sun at 2 p.m. This is an example of, gotta keep it simple, folks, how to note things on your site. So what I did is in the backyard, I noted an existing oak tree and an approximate size of the canopy where my north is. I noted the slope, which is approximate 3 feet drainage towards the tree, and I estimated the shade. Now I've got a morning and an afternoon sun area, so some plants are going to be in full shade, some will get a little bit of sun. And oops, I noticed I did not put the dominant wind direction on here. Number 2 in your garden journal would be to keep track of seasonality. This would be things like weather and weather patterns. For instance, we have an extremely wet season this year. We had a very mild winter coming into this wet season. You might notice any major storms on here, and certainly your first and last frost dates. Now, Selena has just informed us that the first frost date for Harnett County has been changed. It's coming in later now, global warming. Under seasonality, you could also note your calendar chores. And this is a good way to remind you of what should be done when. So for instance, when do you prune your rose bushes or your Japanese maples? When do you put pre-emergent weed control down, etc.? Where would you find some of this information on calendar chores? I'd recommend you check some of your local resources, and your local nurseries will have something on what to do and when to do it. But I would say keep an awareness that the retail nurseries are in the for-profit business, so they will recommend what they carry. There's nothing wrong with that, just be aware of it. And do create your own garden chore calendar. There might be something unique to your property. So here's a sample March garden tasks from a local garden center near me. Fertilizing the tree, shrub, and perennial, and they note what they prefer, which is an espoma product, and mole and vole repellent. After that is applying weed pre-emergent, and time to fertilize fescue lawns. Again, that's just a sample. Number 3, excuse me, to note in your garden journal would be the plants. So you want to keep some kind of a plant profile. So what is the name of it? You might just note the common name. You might note the name that's on the plant ID tag. What conditions are needed? Is this a full sun plant? How much water does it need? Does it want wet soil, dry soil? Is it drought tolerant? What is the eventual height and width of the plant? And here's a note to everybody. When you look at something, say a tree or an evergreen shrub, and it gives you a height of, let's say, 10 feet high, that is an approximation of the height of it in 10 years. 10 years is the accepted standard. Some of these plants will continue to grow past that size. The plant tags will also note whether it's an annual, perennial, or biennial, and Sandy's going to talk more about that. Another thing to keep in there would be any kind of image, whether you take it out of a magazine or an online or photos that you yourself have taken. And note any harvests. For instance, are you growing vegetables? Are you harvesting some fruit on your fig tree, your raspberry bushes? Are you harvesting seeds at the end of the season? I tried to come up with a simple example, and I think that this captures it. If you take the plant tags from your nursery pots, just simply place them on a piece of paper. I couldn't find my Scotch tape, I used freezer tape. And if you notice at the top, I just taped one side. So I can flip that card up and look at the conditions needed, the size, the color of the bloom, any information I need on that. Additionally, on this piece of paper, I've noted what year it is and how many I planted in what garden. Because trust me, you're going to forget. And this is going to be useful as your garden moves into the 3rd year and the 4th year and the 5th year. Additionally, this is a great place to keep track of any sketches you want to make of your gardens. Keep it simple. The graph paper I have on the bottom is just showing a very simple vegetable garden, one from 2019, one from 2020. This is going to be useful for rotating your vegetables year by year. The one on top shows the wind direction and where north is, and it shows what I've planted. And I even used some color pencils to show what colors I've got planted in there because I rather like the chaos of some fun colors. Photos are useful to track your garden's progress. Again, I've gone to my garden, and on the picture on the left, I sort of had this idea of what I wanted to do to the garden, which was get rid of as much lawn as possible. So here's a picture of me after I have sprayed the garden. I then removed the sod, I planted some things, and this is what it looked like 3 years later as it filled in. If you want to really get kind of geeky and nerdy, this is a sample I took from my database, which I keep on Excel, and I've noted the Latin name, the common name, the color of the flower, what season I purchased it, how many, what the broad category of conditions would be, and the height and width of the plant. And the right column, I've just put in some conditions it needs. And that might include when it should be divided or pruned, or whether it does not want to have what's called wet feet in the winter. Number 4 to keep in your garden journal would be to keep an eye on pests. Identify the pests that come into your yard, track the arrival dates and the preferred host plants, and know how to fight them. So here's a for instance on this. You don't need to get crazy when you see a few insects in your backyard. We're really planting for them. The more insects you have, the more birds you have, the more wildlife. It's all kind of fun to watch it. Some of the pests can come in and do a tremendous amount of damage. You might want to keep track of those. So identify them first. I have a brother that was pulling all the worms off his parsley, not knowing that those were caterpillar larvae. Track the arrival dates would be things such as when did those Japanese bugs come in, and how to fight them. I have some conifers that are occasionally invaded by sawfly larvae, and I don't spray for them. I simply take a bowl of soapy water and pick those little larvae off, dump them in the water, and they're dead and gone, and nothing's been sprayed. So take pictures, identify them. On the left, I have what I thought was a monarch butterfly until I looked it up and found out it's a viceroy. And I found this huge bug. The one on the right's about an inch, inch and a half long. But when I got some close-up shots, I realized it's a wheel bug assassin bug. So it is taking care of getting rid of some things I don't want in my garden. Yay! Here's another example. I didn't know what this was. I grabbed a picture because it was such a bright red color. This is what's known as a red velvet ant. It's actually not an ant at all. I believe it's in the wasp family. This does not hurt plants, but it will sting or bite you, so bright color is something to avoid. 5 is where you might note any projects you have coming up, any patio, hardscape, trellis you want to put in. Number 6, keep track of your budget and expenses. You might be horrified to find out how much money you're spending. I know I have been. 7 is any tips, and there are plenty of places to find tips. You can get fact sheets from your local nurseries. You can find design ideas in magazines, in house.com or on Pinterest or on other sources online. You can print those out, add them into your journal, and anything that appeals to you for your future reference. So what I'm going to do here, this hyperlink shows you the book that we're all referring to, the Extension Gardener Handbook, but I'd like to read this directly because I think it's so well stated. Garden journals are as varied as the perennials in a garden. Selecting a style is a matter of preference. Choose a format you are comfortable with and committed to using on a regular basis. By recording the information over a long period of time, you will create an invaluable source of information about your yard and garden that will guide you in making any future decisions about plants, problems, or design. Capturing information about the site, seasonal factors, plants, pests, projects, and expenses will provide the data necessary to make informed decisions and have a successful, thriving garden now and in the future. And just to give you an example of that in my garden, some of my perennials are very late arrivals, and I have actually planted other plants on top of them thinking that they were not returning. So a garden journal is a handy dandy. So it's great to keep track of what you've planted. In the spring, you don't want to pull up that gorgeous flowering perennial. It was a showstopper last year. Maybe you even want to buy more of them, and you'll have the name and probably where you bought it, so you'll be able to get more. Make the garden journal yours. Keep it simple. What is it that you want to record? What was planted? Where was it planted? And when was it planted? You could also note when it blooms or when the vegetables and fruits ripen. And that's it from the garden journal. Thank you.
All right, y'all. Hopefully y'all can hear me.
Yes, Selena.
All right. So I just want to say we're going to take a quick 5-minute break or so for using the bathroom, coffee, whatever you want to. So we'll probably meet back up around 11:01. But I wanted to go ahead and make a couple of quick announcements because we've had some questions coming in. There were questions about any additional resources or if we would have copies of the slides afterwards. So we're working on putting our website together, and we will put PDF copies of the presentations there in addition to provide a PDF document of additional resources you can use. So when you hear the Extension Master Gardener Handbook, you will have that link as well. And I'll mention that again as we wrap up the presentation at the end as well. So with that, we'll meet back up at 11:01 and we'll get started with Susan. All right, y'all, I have 11:01 on my clock, so we'll give just a couple more seconds for Susan to get ready, and then we will jump into vegetable gardening.
Susan, you're muted. Oh, there you go. Okay.
There we go. Okay, first off, I want to thank Joan for her interesting presentation. She makes me want to start a journal with all her neat ideas, and I may actually get started with one this year. My name is Susan. I am from the 2019 Master Gardener class, so I am the newbie of this group. I'm going to lightly review the topics of vegetable gardening and composting. Now, I think there's nothing more satisfying than having a fresh tomato from your garden to make a sandwich, or having bragging rights that all the vegetables in your eggplant parm came from your garden. So let's get started with a garden of your own so you can have bragging rights. The first task is to determine where in your yard to put the garden. If possible, find a place that provides 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight and is oriented north to south. It's really important to have a nearby water source, as your garden will need 1 inch of water weekly, and you will have to make up the remainder of water if there's no rain during the week. Now, we've all talked about different guides. The NCSU publication titled Vegetable Gardening is an interesting beginner's guide to get you started with your garden. A garden journal, as Joan discussed, is a wonderful tool to use with a garden and very helpful in the years to come. Now, the next objective is to decide what type of garden you want. Generally, there are 3 types of vegetable gardens. The first type is a container garden, which is great for patios or porches. A container garden can be made with any type of container as long as there's drainage. I've used felt bags and coated fabric bags, as well as half whiskey barrels or buckets like you see in the picture here. Now, container gardens dry out faster than other gardens, so they will require more frequent watering. Vegetables can be mixed and matched in containers. Containers can be moved for additional sun or for less sun. Flowers and vegetables can be mixed and matched for a beautiful display, kind of like this one, where there's a mixture of different lettuces, Swiss chard, and marigolds. The next type of garden is raised beds. When constructing your raised beds, you will need to avoid treated wood or railroad ties, which can contain chemicals that will leach into the soil. The benefits of raised beds compared to in-ground gardens are as follows. The soil warms up sooner and stays warmer longer, and it's easier to amend the soil. The bed can be raised to fit a chair under it or used for standing. The soil will be less compacted than an in-ground garden. Challenges of raised beds include the expense of building them, and more frequent watering is needed as well. Here's a higher raised bed so the gardener can work in a standing position. The covering prevents deer and birds from snacking on the vegetables. Another type of vegetable garden is the traditional in-ground rows. Vegetables are planted directly into the ground. Your garden can be made as large or small as you desire. Benefits of in-ground gardens include they're less expensive to create, equipment can be used, and less watering is needed. Challenges of in-ground gardens include the soil texture may not be quite what you want, so the soil texture may need to be amended. The area may be less accessible than raised beds, and the soil may become more compacted. Compost material is very beneficial for changing the soil texture. In addition to traditional rows in the ground, many gardeners plant vegetables and herbs among their flower beds around their home. Combinations of container gardens, raised beds, and in-the-ground plantings can also be planned. Okay, now that you've decided what type of garden you want, the next step is to decide what you want to plant and when to get started. Now's the time to get started with your fall garden. Cool season gardens have the advantage of less pests to deal with. Of course, you want to grow what vegetables you like, but it's nice to try some new ones too. Cool season annuals are started in the early spring and fall when temperatures are below 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Listed here on this slide are a few of the vegetables that work well for cool season gardens. Notice that these are leafy vegetables and roots. Now there's been a change this year with dates. The year's first killing freeze is due the last day of October. Warm season annuals are planted after the last spring frost, which here in North Carolina is April 15th. On this slide, there are a few examples of warm season plantings. Using the NCSU planting guides, year-round production can be planned. Harnett County falls in both central and eastern North Carolina. The NCSU planting guides for both of these areas are useful tools to determine when to plant. These guides list when to plant seeds and plants, how much distance should be between plants, and they also list the days to harvest for both seeds and plants. Organizing the garden is the next step. As I said before, north to south orientation, if possible, makes the best use of sunlight. Tall crops and trellised vines are planted on the north side so they won't shade shorter plants. It's a good idea to plan a 3 to 4 year crop rotation for each bed or garden area to prevent crops in the same family from being planted in the same space in succession. You can keep records of what type of seeds were used, how many plants you planted, what the vegetable yield was for a crop. Descriptions of pests or diseases and any actions taken can be helpful for future gardens. Recording planting dates, harvesting dates, how much rain the season had, and anything else you think would be helpful for the next season can be recorded in a journal. I always found it very helpful to record how many quarts of a vegetable I would get per row. That always helped me out the next year when I was canning and freezing. Now this picture is an example of a 4-year crop rotation. If you planted 4 raised beds or 4 rows, the first one being leafy, the second with fruits, the third with roots, and the fourth with legumes, next year you'd move everything over 1 bed or row and then repeat this every year. This helps avoid pest and pathogen buildup that can happen if the same type of plant is planted in the same area over and over. Now, Sabrina did a great job discussing soil. So all I'm going to say about that is that the soil boxes are available from our office and can be found in the cabinet at the front door. After you've filled out all of the material and filled your boxes, you can put them back in the cabinet when you've finished and we will send them off. Once you have your results, amend the soil based on recommendations from the soil analysis into the top 6 to 8 inches of soil. When planting, seeds or plants can be used for your vegetable garden. Seeds are less expensive and easier to find. The seed packets will tell you how deep to plant the seeds and how far apart to plant them. The packet will also give you a description of the vegetable and the time it takes to harvest your crop. Seeds can be started 6 to 8 weeks before planting and then transplanted in your garden. If you have leftovers, leftover seeds, you can put them in a plastic bag and store them 1 to 3 years in the freezer. Plants are more expensive than seeds. They can be planted later than seeds with a faster harvest. When you transplant a plant from its original container, make sure that you plant to the soil line of the container and don't heap the soil over the stem. Seeds work better with root crops, as roots like carrots and radishes do not transplant well. I don't think I've ever seen radishes in a container, but I have seen carrots for sale here in the past couple years in containers. On average, vegetable gardens need 1 inch of water per week. Using a rain gauge will help you determine how much water you need to supply weekly. You want to water your seeds until the seedlings are 4 to 5 inches tall. Water that daily. Water new seeds and transplants daily until they're established. Now, this first picture shows a drip line for watering. Using a watering can be helpful for spot watering, and sprinklers can also be used. As far as general care goes, you want to fertilize based on your soil analysis recommendations. Mulch can help to maintain moisture and manage weeds. Growing seasons can be extended by protecting crops from extreme temperatures by using cold frames and frost cloths. And of course, watch for pests and deal with them as soon as you notice them. When your vegetables are ready to pick, visit your garden daily to ensure the vegetables will be picked at the peak of perfection. That way you won't get any baseball bat-sized zucchini. Insect or animal scavengers are attracted to spoiled, overripe vegetables, so a daily visit can help you avoid this from happening. If your vegetables come into contact with any animal feces, please discard those vegetables. And of course, enjoy the fruits of your labor. Now you have bragging rights, and well-deserved. Now, to end this review of vegetable gardening, I would like to recommend the North Carolina Extension Gardener Handbook, Chapter 16 on vegetable gardening. This chapter has useful charts for temperatures, crop rotation, a planting calendar, and a guide on when to harvest. Now let's move on to composting. Compost is the organic material that will improve the soil's structure and also contribute needed nutrients to the soil. It can include some of the same dead materials you would ordinarily spade under while working your garden, like dead leaves or little twigs. Compost consists of 2 components: browns, which are the carbon sources, and greens, which are the nitrogen sources. You'll be using your compost to fertilize the soil. Dead leaves, newspaper, straw, hay, sawdust, napkins, cardboard, and twigs are browns, and grass clippings, vegetable scraps, fruit, coffee grounds, tea leaves, livestock manure, and alfalfa would be considered greens. Do not put oily products, dairy products, meat, bone, animal waste, or diseased plants and fruits into your pile. Some people freeze their food scraps and add them to the pile occasionally, or put them in a container to be added to the pile daily. When you add your food scraps to the pile, bury them in the middle to avoid attracting rodents. Here's a picture of a rotating compost bin. Although some people like these, there are different types of composting piles. To get started with any type of pile, place it in a shaded area within reach of a water source. Some composters don't use bins, but arrange their piles on the ground. And here's another style of bin for composting. There are 2 basic styles of composting: single batch and the continuous pile. Single batch is where the materials are all added at once. The continuous pile is where organic materials are added as available. Either way, the pile needs to be watered thoroughly, each layer at a time, to get an even moisture distribution. Use a handful of soil on each layer to introduce microorganisms. Worms and bugs will help the microorganisms assist in breaking down the materials. Browns and greens are a 2-to-1 ratio mixture. Chopping materials into smaller particles help create more surface area and helps accelerate decomposition, especially in cooler weather. I've noticed that a watermelon rind in a 2-day period when it's 95 degrees will totally disappear from a compost pile, but in the wintertime it takes a little bit longer. Make sure your pile stays moist. It should feel like a wrung out sponge. The pile also needs air to help decompose the materials. To aerate, turn the materials with a fork or shovel. I find it helpful to move the pile to another bin and then return it to the original bin. This helps me mix it well. Mixing the pile by moving the material from the outside to the center will help the decomposition. Temperatures range from 55 to 155 degrees Fahrenheit as the microorganisms feed on waste. Above 140 degrees Fahrenheit is too hot for most bacteria, but will kill pathogens and weed seed. If the temperatures climb above 140 degrees Fahrenheit, it helps to turn the pile to bring the temperature down. That 140 degrees is where the perfect temperature to keep it. And thermometers for composting are readily available. Here's another style of compost bin. Now you notice how there's plants growing on the edges. This shows the pile didn't get hot enough to kill seeds. And I will have to admit, I have a cherry tomato plant and a cucumber plant growing out the side of mine right now. Compost is ready to use when your garden, in your garden when the original materials are not recognizable. The pile will have shrunk to 1/3 of its size, and it will be dark brown, crumbly and loose, and it will have an earthy smell. Your beautiful looking compost is now ready to use to amend the first 6 to 8 inches of your soil. It can be used to top dress over existing plants before mulching, and a homemade liquid fertilizer can be made by making a compost tea with a 1 part compost to 10 parts water to put on the soil. A good source of information on composting is the North Carolina Extension Gardener Handbook, Chapter 2 on composting. This ends my time, and I'd like to introduce Wanda, who will be speaking on lawns. Thank you.
Get started over here. Let's see.
Are you clicking to a website or just
Mm.
staying in the PowerPoint?
I'm staying right in the PowerPoint. Okay. And lawns, I'm going to go to, wait a minute. Where am I? Oh, sharing the screen. I'm going to, oh, there it is. Slideshow. Let's hope that it goes. Microsoft PowerPoint has stopped working. It's trying to recover your information. Can y'all hear me? Oh, oh, let's see what we do this. Screen sharing has stopped as the sharing window is closed. Hi, Sam. Can anyone hear me?
We can hear you, Wanda. We
All
could
right.
see your presentation was up, but now we don't see it.
Okay, I was getting some notifications that some things had stopped sharing. So let me go back and do this again then. I need to go to the
Share screen.
and then I clicked on, so everybody, let's see, where are we here? I'm trying, I don't see it. Do you see that here, my presentation?
Ooh, it looks like it closed completely out.
Oh, that's not good.
No.
Go
Go ahead, mute yourself.
Okay, where is the mute here? Oh, here.
I could continue with ornamentals if you all need, oh, okay, looks like you got it, great. We see the presentation, Wanda, but you're muted. There you go.
Great. I need to go down here for my notes. Let's see. That's one more thing we need to do is to find the notes here. And I'm not seeing it at the bottom. Can you see the? Okay, everyone, we're just a few more technical difficulties. Does it need to be a little smaller?
Do you have a printout of your notes?
No, I do not. That's why. Oh, I see them now. I can see them right there. There we go.
Now, before you do that, you have to share your screen.
Okay, let's see. Is that up here for me to share? All right. All right, I think we're about getting this. This is the long way to get to where we're going. Oh, this is it. Okay, and we want to go to slide.
Can you hover down that button?
Yes. And then okay, Sandy, does that look like that's
It does. We can see your presentation perfectly and we hear you fine.
okay? Great, thank you so much for helping out with that. So at least someone had to have the problems to come up, but things just kind of went down. We actually had to reload that. So, all right, so we're ready to begin. First, I'd like to say thank you to Susan for a great job on two of my favorite topics. I absolutely love vegetables and I love making compost. Hello, everyone. I am Wanda Brown, and I've been a master gardener for 3 years. I will be presenting information today about lawns taken from the North Carolina Extension Gardener Handbook and the Carolina Lawns publication. And you'll be able to find the links to these two publications on the resource page for this webinar. Now let's take a look at this first picture here. Isn't this a beautiful lawn? Don't we always turn our heads when we pass by a beautiful lawn? Wouldn't you like to look outside the window at your home and see a lawn that looks like this? Now I'm going to add in a little something else before we go a lot farther. If you've noticed today, everything has been about your soil and about vegetables, and we talk about a gardening crash course, and now we have thrown in lawns. We decided to do this today because this is just a part of your landscape too. So since we're doing a crash course, we put in the section on lawns for information. Now, I certainly hope the information that I'm showing you is going to help you to have a lawn like this. We can improve the health and the appearance of your lawn. So what are lawns? Lawns are smooth living carpets that can add beauty and recreational space to your home. A lawn helps the environment by stabilizing the soil, reducing air pollution, noise, heat, dust, and glare. And it can add a lot of value to your home when your lawn looks very pleasing to look at. So where do we start? Let's look at this first statement. A lush lawn with minimal maintenance and pesticide use can be achieved by choosing a well-adapted grass for your location and planting it during the correct time of the year. So the first step to that dream lawn is choosing which type of grass you will use to establish a new lawn or to renovate an existing lawn. There are two categories of grass grown in North Carolina, cool season and warm season. We'll first discuss the characteristics of cool season grass. Cool season grasses can be found in the Piedmont and the mountain regions of North Carolina. They're planted in the early fall. They remain green throughout most of the winter. They perform best in the spring and the fall. They can become stressed in the summer heat. And some examples of a cool season grass would be tall fescues, Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass, and fine fescues. Now let's look at some warm season grasses. Warm season grasses are found in the Piedmont and the coastal plains. They're planted in the late spring or the early summer. They grow best in the summer. They go dormant in the fall with heavy frost and turn brown. They green up slowly in the spring, and they perform better the farther east and the farther south you live. So examples of warm season grasses would be Bermuda grass, zoysia, centipede grass, St. Augustine grass, carpet grass, and Bahia grass. So after looking at both these slides, did you notice that both warm season and cool season grasses can be grown in the Piedmont? So if that's the case, how do you decide whether you need a cool season or a warm season grass for your lawn? So let's look at choosing the right grass. What information should you consider? Look at the North Carolina regions map at the bottom of the slide. Most of us in this area have probably always thought that we live in the Piedmont. We do live almost in the middle of the state, right? But if you're joining us from Wake County, you will see that you are definitely in the Piedmont region. But if you live in Harnett County, you will see that the division line for the Piedmont and the coastal plains runs directly through the middle of the county. So now we need to look specifically at your Harnett County address to decide whether which region you live in and to see what soil type you have on your property. Now, the best resource tool to locate this information is to use the Harnett County GIS maps. You can also find this site listed on the resource guide for today's presentation. Now, once you arrive at the website, you will select the tax parcels option. And if you're thinking, haven't we covered this already? Yes, in Sabrina's soils, she did speak extensively. So I'm just touching base here. So once you reach the tax parcels, you will be prompted to enter your physical property address. At that point, a map and an information box will pop up. In the box, it will tell you exactly in which region you live. When I put in my address on Dry Creek Road, just down Highway 210, between here at the Extension Office and the Harnett Central Schools, I find that I live in the southern coastal plains. Also in this box, it tells me that I have Norfolk A and Norfolk B soils. So this is a quick place to get the information you need. And if you want to read further about your soil type, you can select the soil analysis document to read more. Now, the next consideration for choosing the right grass is the climate. Climate refers to the specific characteristics of the area where you live. Things to think about here would be, where are the shaded parts of your property? How long is this area shaded? What grass will tolerate various amounts of shade? Will there be a lot of water? Will there be a lot of wear and tear in the area that you select to plant your grass? Will children play there? What grass will tolerate a lot of activity? Will grass that you plant tolerate heat, cold, or drought, conditions that might occur in your area? Next is desired appearance. Did you realize that you can also choose the color and texture of your grass? Color selections can be light, medium, dark, and shades in between. Texture selections can be fine, medium, coarse, or a combination of these. You will find information to help answer these questions and select an appropriate grass for your site on an excellent chart found in both the Master Gardener Handbook and the Carolina Lawns publication. This chart also includes information on rates of grass establishment and maintenance requirements for each of grass choice. Now, I personally find this chart to be a great resource tool because it puts everything just in one place. Now, if you are establishing a new lawn, there are some things that you will want to focus on before you throw out all those seeds. How are you going to prepare your site? You prepare the soil by getting rid of current vegetation. Make sure it's level and that all soil parts are smaller than a marble. Do a soil test as discussed earlier in Sabrina's presentation on soils. Use that soil test to plant in the right season based on the grass you selected. Choose a planting method. You may choose from planting seeds, or you may choose sprigs, which are a vegetative method using actual grass plants and spacing over the prepared soil. Or you could use sod, which is a pre-grown grass purchased in rolls or squares. And then also, before you throw out the seeds, you might want to research some maintenance needs to make sure that you will be ready to tackle these chores as they arise. So you will need to determine how you're going to irrigate, know how often and what height you should mow your grass for optimum growth and health, research the fertilization schedule for your grass and what types of fertilizer you will need, acquaint yourself with integrated pest management to prepare for problems that might arise. And we'll discuss more about IPM later in the presentation. Now, what if you have an established lawn? Most of you may already have an established lawn, whether it is from a new home that you've just purchased or in an older home. If it's a newly built home, the grass will already have been established before you purchase the home. In this case, see what you can find out from the builder. Find out the type of grass planted so that you will know how to proceed in taking care of the lawn. While you have them on the phone, ask them to give you some information about all the plants placed in the landscape. You'll find that this information will be very helpful later on. In an older home, the lawn may need some revitalization, or maybe there are places that need some attention. So let's look at some lawn maintenance jobs that might possibly be reasons that your lawn does not look its best. First, look at irrigation. Is there too much or not enough water? How can you remedy this? Look at mowing. Are you mowing correctly? Are you mowing too low? Is your mower unlevel, causing bare spots? What changes can be made and what are needed? How about fertilizing? Does your grass need amendments? Do a soil test to check for specific needs. Weed management. Are there too many weeds? What is the best way to control those? You could pull them out by the handfuls. You could dig them out. You could treat with pre or post-emergent applications. And then, do you have thatch buildup or is your soil compacted? There's a process called coring that will alleviate compaction of the soil, which is caused by heavy traffic in the yard. Grass does not grow well in compacted soil. Coring is done by using a device that will remove cores of soil over the lawn. These cores are then broken up and spread out across the lawn. Power raking can be used when thatch has built up. Some grasses tend to build up thatch when heavily fertilized and watered. Power raking is performed by using a blade with teeth to rake and break up the thick patches. Now let's discuss renovation. Renovation refers to any procedure beyond normal maintenance that is required to upgrade an existing lawn. A deteriorated lawn is often a symptom of some kind of underlying problem. So first you must identify that exact problem. If you renovate the lawn before you correct the problem, your lawn will deteriorate again. Then all that time, effort, and money will be wasted because you will need to renovate over and over. Some reasons for lawn deterioration could be poor establishment at planting, improper lawn management, poorly adapted grasses, thatch buildup, disease, insect, or weed infestation. So once you have determined the problem, if it can't be corrected easily, it might be time to do a complete renovation of the problem area. If you decide to renovate, you will need to consider the following. Can you correct the existing problem with improved maintenance procedures, or will you need to take out everything and start over in the problem area? Realize that renovation will take some time. Improved maintenance procedures may take weeks or longer to correct the problem. If you start over, that's going to take even longer. If you decide to start over, some things to consider first would be to determine how you eliminate your current vegetation. If redoing an entire lawn, determine what grass you will be replanting and prepare to plant during the correct season for that grass. Allow enough time before planting to do the soil test, review the results, and amend the soil to prepare for a healthy start. Then you need to prepare a good seed bed, loosen the soil, fill in the low places, and again, smooth surfaces so that surface clods are smaller than marbles. Now you will be ready to replant using the information above about starting a new lawn that we discussed earlier. Have you ever thought about using some lawn alternatives in your landscape? A lawn alternative would be putting something in a space that would not be grass. Think about this. Lawns are just not about the grass. Consider your lawn to be an extension of your home. It is your outdoor living space where all kinds of activities may take place. Just as you have rooms on the inside of your house, there are rooms on the outside of your house to live in. So add some variety to your landscape and you can cut down on all that grass mowing. So what are some possible alternative areas that may be added to your landscape? Let's look at some of these on the slide. An outdoor living space for entertaining, a play area or a pool area, a butterfly or pollinator garden, natural or native plant areas, a ground cover area, a flower garden, a vegetable or an herb garden. Now, can you think of other areas that you might include into the landscape that would fit the needs or interests of your family? For more information on these and other ideas, check out Chapter 19 of the Extension Gardener Handbook and read more about lawn alternatives. And as you can see, we've covered a lot of these areas that were listed on this slide today. All right, now we've touched on IPM a little earlier. So let's look more specifically at integrated pest management to get a general idea of what it means. IPM is a balanced use of all available control methods to keep pests from reaching damaging levels. What are pests? Pests in your lawn could be anything from weeds to insects. So what are the control methods for these? There are 4 control methods: mechanical, cultural, pesticides, and a combination of methods. First, mechanical control is physical control, pulling the weeds, catching and disposing of insects, keeping the grass mowed. What are cultural methods? These are things that we can do to change things in the area by creating an unfavorable environment for the pest. For example, seeding and keeping grass healthy is a way to push out weeds. Or maybe you could plant specific plants in the landscape that would discourage various kinds of insects. Next, the use of pesticides is a chemical method where you would apply chemical products to the lawn for control of the problem, such as pre- and post-emergent products for weed control or specified products for insect control. But before using these chemicals, and you need to make sure that that is the best option for the problem. Then finally, a combination method of control would be to use all 3 of the above methods and not just use one of them. This approach will be much more effective. I'm sure you see this big red statement at the bottom of this slide. This statement cannot be emphasized enough when you are considering using a pesticide. A word about pesticides: the label is the law. Read the label. The label will tell you when, how, and where you are to use the product. It will discuss safety measures and precautions. It will also emphasize that in using the product, you are assuming all responsibilities that go along with any misuse of the product. So read and be careful. Follow the label precisely to protect not only yourself, but your children, your friends and neighbors, your pets, our wildlife, and the environment. Now, how does this backyard look? Don't we all just want to go out and relax in this setting? So to have a place like this for ourselves, we have learned that our first step to a healthy and beautiful lawn begins with some planning. It sounds like a lot, I know, but it all doesn't have to be done in one season. Plan your landscape in stages. Complete one part of your dream at a time. Know that your landscape will be an ever-changing part of your home as your family's interests and needs change over time. But most importantly, you should know that you are not alone. Harnett County Cooperative Extension Services are here to help you. You may call to ask questions and get information. Use the Extension website to look for upcoming workshops and training sessions. Follow us on Facebook for short, informative videos and information links. And don't forget to use the online resources from North Carolina State University about thousands of researched topics. In closing, I would like to remind you that you will find the links to all the resources I have mentioned in the presentation today on the resource page for today's webinar, and also for all of the other presentations that were made today. I hope you've gained some helpful information from this information. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Wanda. My name is Sandy Anastasio, and, oh, excuse me. Get this back there. Okay. My name is Sandy Anastasio, and I've been an Extension Master Gardener volunteer since 2016. And if you enjoy gardening and learning more about it and sharing it with others, I encourage you to come and join us. We have a great time here in Harnett County. Today, I'm going to talk with you about ornamentals. There are two different types of ornamentals. There are woody ornamentals and there are herbaceous ornamentals, and we are going to learn the difference. Herbaceous ornamentals. The Extension Gardener Handbook, Chapter 10, is on herbaceous ornamentals. I won't go through that with you today, but I encourage you to go to that resource. Again, we will be providing you with all the links for these free resources that are just at your fingertips. But I do encourage you to go and check that chapter out. There's a lot of things that I'm not going to touch on today just for time's sake. So we're going to talk about annuals, perennials, and biennials, which are included in herbaceous ornamentals. Herbaceous ornamentals are plants that have flexible stems and die back to the ground each year. I find that when people are new to gardening, they are sometimes confused about the difference between annuals, perennials, and biennials. So I'm just quickly going to go through those with you now so that you'll know the difference when you go to shop for them. This is a slide of a geranium, which is an annual. Other examples of annuals would be impatiens, petunias, and marigolds. Think about annuals as the flowers that you go to purchase at a gardening center or a big box store in the spring, and you purchase those for your containers or your flower beds. Annuals die after a growing season. They are sensitive to temperatures that are either too hot, like a pansy. We plant pansies in the fall. They overwinter and they die back in the summer when our heats start to crank up, or that it's too cold for the annual, like a geranium, the impatiens, the others that I mentioned, we get frost, and that is what ends their life. Perennials are more expensive than annuals. They're an investment in your landscaping, and they will need to be divided as the years go by. Examples of perennials are purple coneflowers or echinacea, irises, or this picture of a calla lily. Both annuals and perennials do have a purpose in our gardens. Perennials have a season of bloom. Each one is a different season of bloom. So it's really nice to plan your perennials so that you have them blooming at different times throughout your season. And then for that lasting color that will be there all summer long, then you pop in those annuals, which are a little bit less expensive. Biennials spend the first year developing foliage, and the next year they develop the bloom, and then they die. This is a picture of a foxglove. Another example of a biennial would be a hollyhock. Now we'll move on to woody ornamentals. And again, in Extension Gardener Handbook, Chapter 11, you will find everything you need to know about woody ornamentals. I will, again, just be touching high points. I will not be speaking about bare root planting, but that is something that you may find that you need help with if you purchase something mail order. Or maybe you've planted a tree, you're not sure, do you need to stake it? And if you do, how do you do that? I'm not going to speak about that today, but I want you to know that that information is there for you to find the answers to all your questions. Woody ornamentals are long-lived perennials with stems and branches that increase in girth and height each growing season. Unlike herbaceous plants that die back to the ground in the winter, woody ornamentals have persistent woody tissue that remains above ground year-round and develop new buds in the spring. Woody ornamentals fall in 3 categories, which are vines, trees, and shrubs. And now we'll just take a few minutes to talk about each one. On the left, we have a picture of a 5-leaf kiba or chocolate vine. On the right is a picture of a passion flower vine. Both of these are native vines here in North Carolina. Vines are climbing or crawling woody plants with self-supporting stems. When they are allowed to crawl on the ground, they become ground covers. Providing a vertical support for a vine is fabulous because you create more interest in your garden. Maybe you have a small yard and you can't take a huge piece of, your sod out to develop a huge linear garden, but you could go vertical. And it's perfect for small spaces. Shrubs, oh, excuse me, I'll move on. Shrubs are woody plants that grow up to 12 feet tall with foliage extending to the ground. They often have multiple trunks and can be deciduous, which means they lose their leaves, or evergreen. Trees are woody plants that typically grow more than 12 feet tall and usually have one main trunk, and again, can be deciduous or evergreen. Right plant, right place. This is a phrase we use a lot as master gardeners. One of the biggest mistakes we make in gardening is that we pick the wrong plant for the place that we are planting. To protect your investment of time and money, remember this phrase: right plant, right place. Now we're going to review some considerations that you should think about so that you are picking the right plant for the right place that you're developing. Plants fall in sun requirements. Full sun's described as 6 or more hours of unfiltered midday sun. If you have a west-facing exposure and it receives less than 6 hours of sunlight, it is considered full sun here in North Carolina because the afternoon sun is so hot here. The next sunlight classification would be partial sun. Sometimes you will see this listed as partial shade. It's unfiltered sun in the morning and shade in the afternoon. And generally this is an east-facing exposure, but that can differ if there's a building or trees or something like that. Shade is very little direct sun. Another consideration is soil. We've had both Sabrina and Wanda and all of us who have talked about the importance of soil. So you really need to understand what your soil consists of. Is it clay? Is it sand? Is it wet? Is it dry? The consideration I have the biggest problem with personally is space. How big will this plant get at maturity? Joan talked about the tags on plants, giving you the size, and again, that is at 10 years, but I'm not very good at paying attention to those things. I'm trying to be better. I have some things I need to move, and I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to keep them alive because I've allowed them to get too big, and now I'm going to have to be digging up some big roots. Other considerations you may want to think about is toxicity to humans, or maybe you have a dog that likes to chew on your plants. Maybe you have a lot of deer and you'd like to choose some deer-resistant plants. Or maybe you want to really try to plant some natives. You're very interested in getting more natives out there. These are all considerations that you can think about, and we have a great tool to help you figure that out. This is a picture of an area in my yard that last spring I took the sod out. It was clay. It was not perking great. The only advantage was that it was at the top of a slope. But I needed to pick a plant, and I went to my NC plant database. And I'm going to take you there now. This is a fabulous resource and really fun to play around with. And I invite you to just, in your free time during this COVID, when you're probably sitting home with not a ton of things to do, play around with this. It is really fun. As you can see, there's over 4,000 plants in this database.
Oh,
And I'm
Sandy?
just, yes?
Yeah, we can't see the website. We're still looking at the PowerPoint.
Okay, let me see what's going on here.
You'll have to change your share settings real quick.
How's that?
There you go. Perfect.
You see it now?
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So this is our North Carolina Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox. And I'm just gonna take you through a few ways that you can use it and how I've used it. So let's start with, for instance, I recently got interested in Mop Head Hydrangeas. So if we just page down here a little bit, where the area where it says search by scientific or common name, I don't know about you, but I hardly ever know those scientific names, but I can put in a common name, and I'm gonna type in Mop Head. And you can see I got Mop Head in, and I'm getting a list already. So I'm gonna touch on that. And here we go. It's going to give me the name of the plant, and this is kind of fun. I have some issues with language at times, so if you really, it's going to tell you how to say it. It's also going to tell you common names. It's going to give you a description of that plant, why it's called a mop head, pHs that it enjoys, and again, you'll find that out from your soil test. I mean, you could even do a soil test of an area just where you want to plant hydrangeas, so you know what the acidity is. If you go a little further, you will see pictures, and there's a slide here, and you can just slide over and view all those pictures so you can see a ton of examples of mop heads. We can go down a little further. There's often videos that accompany the descriptions. Then we're going to see cultivars and varieties so that you can shop for specific colors or other characteristics that appeal to you. I recently bought an LA Dreamin' because I just love the color that mop head has. Not all plants are going to have that many varieties and cultivars. This one just has a lot. Then we're going to get to attributes, flowers, stems, and this is very specific information. Just a really quick look at what the plants look like, what their life cycle is, perennial, woody. It has different colors. It tells you that in the center column, where you could use it in your landscape there on the far right. Dimensions on the left there, that is what I need to know. I need to know how big is that plant going to get at height and at width, at maturity. It goes on to talk about problems with it. There are, it's poisonous to humans, cats, dogs, horses. That's something I need to know. I have horses. I don't want to plant that somewhere where a horse could walk by and grab a bite of it, or I'm going to have a big vet bill. It continues to go down with more information. Now it's talking on the far left about cultural conditions. That's where I'm going to see what the light requirements might need to be, what the soil texture they require or they do well in, the pH, what's the drainage need to be. Sometimes you'll have a low spot in your yard and there's not a whole lot you can do regarding amending the soil, but you could plant the right plant there so that it would really do well because it occasionally likes to be wet. And I see here that this hydrangea does. And then the different regions. Okay, I'm quickly gonna just go back up to the top. Now, I showed you the picture of the area that I had removed the sod to prepare for planting. And now I had to find a plant for that area, and I'm going to show you what I did to find that. I went to find a plant, and I like to start with the cultural conditions, and I like to start with light because there's really not a ton of things you can do quickly to change the light situation. So the area that I am working on is partial shade or part sun. I get morning sun and afternoon shade. So that already is going to narrow this database down to 2,600 plants. The next area I'm going to go to is the one again that I have the most trouble with, and that is available space to plant. This space is only 12 feet wide. So I don't want to put 60 feet wide because that's not going to work for me. So again, it has narrowed down my plants now to 264. I'm going to go a little further, but before I put in any more parameters, I want to point out that you could look under the landscape feature. That's where you're going to see resistance to challenges. So I'm just going to touch on that just so you can see. This is where you would place an X for deer if you have a deer issue, and you can see there's 110 plants that are resistant to deer that I could consider for this spot. Or maybe you have wet soil further down, 35 there. Maybe the rabbits are a problem, 24 there. I'm going to continue down. And under whole plant traits, this is where we're going to put in whether we're looking for an annual, a perennial, a tree, a vine, a shrub. I know that I want a shrub. I'm going to check that box. And then the next thing I want, and you can also see there's soil texture, pH, you could put parameters in for that. Do check out landscape location. It will tell you, it will give you options for maybe you want to be able to put this specimen in a container. Maybe you don't want to put it in the ground. What would work in a container? We do have some shrubs that you could plant in a container. I'm going to continue down further. To flower color and flower bloom time. I would like something that blooms in the winter. Oh, I've got 19 options. So here we go. I've now narrowed it down to my light setting, my available space to plant. I want a shrub and I want it to bloom in the winter. And this is the choices I have. Okay, I think I'm going to consider a camellia. So here I go. I can find out more about camellias, description. There are lots of different camellias too. This is just one type of camellia. Here's those pictures again. So I'm just going to use my slide and slide over so you can see all the different pictures, and maybe there's something there that, oh, whoa, I'd like to have a white one. All right, now I'm just going to go back down and I'm going to show you two other things, but we'll do this one next. And this is identify a plant. Recently or last spring, there's a place I like to walk every day, and I noticed this plant in the shade in the woods. And I thought, whoa, I wonder if that would work in my yard. So I started with identify a plant. I'm going to try to find out what that plant is. And this is how I'm going to do it. So first I'm going to start with woody plant leaf characteristics. I know that it's deciduous because I saw it with no leaves prior to it leafing out and blooming. So I'm going to check that. Now it has already reduced my database to 1678. I'm going to go a little further under habit. Did I go? Yep, went too far. Okay. Habit and form. I know that it is not arching, it's not climbing, it's not conical. I'm going to say it's erect. Doesn't weep, it doesn't mound, nothing like that. So I'm going to go further. I'm going to put in as much information as I know about this plant. I'm going to go to flower because I saw a red flower. So again, I can touch that. And the last thing I knew about this was it bloomed in the spring. So I'm going to go back to flower, under flower bloom time, and that was a spring flower. I'm going to check that. And oh my goodness, with just a little bit of searching, I found the tree or the shrub that I was seeing in the woods, and it was the Red Buckeye. So now I can look at this. Yep, that was the flower I saw. That's exactly what it looked like. I see this description. It describes it to me, and oh my goodness, it's a native. I had no idea, although I should have known because it was just growing in the woods. Gives me lots of information, how it was used, dimensions, height and width, 20 feet, 25 feet high, 20 feet wide. I really don't have a spot in my yard for something that big. So I know now I'm not going to be able to plant that in my yard, but I can enjoy it on my walks. And again, all of this great information that it's going to provide for you. Okay, I'm going to go back up to the top. I'm going to just go quickly. The last thing I wanted to share with you is here at the top, design gallery. In this database, there are 112 gardens. They're always adding new ones. These are all gardens in North Carolina. You can get lots of ideas here. It is alphabetical. So it starts with Asians, goes to back Asian gardens, goes to groupings, etc. I'm going to just touch page 2. Maybe you want to do an urban flower cottage garden. It's going to give you ideas for how to achieve that. A hidden vegetable garden. Maybe your HOA doesn't want you to have a vegetable garden on the side of your house. Hydrangeas in the garden. Lots of options here. So please explore that. It's so much fun. It even shows you raised bed gardening, all sorts of really cool stuff. Okay. So that's our plant database, and that answered the sunlight, soil, how big is the space, the flowers, do I want deciduous evergreens, special requirements, all of that information is there at your fingertips. I love that. I think it's one of the most fun things that we have online, and it's all free. Okay, we're going to talk about natives and their importance. Our Extension Gardener Handbook does dedicate a whole chapter. Again, I invite you to explore that because they do have a place in our gardens, and an important place. First of all, they attract more birds, butterflies, and wildlife. And one of the reasons we have fewer songbirds is because they're not finding access to the seeds and the fruits and the high-fat caterpillars that are so important to raise their babies. They're low maintenance and they grow well. That's why they're native here. They just grow. They just do well. But there is a downside to some of our landscape planting. And by planting natives, you can avoid an invasive plant problem that we do have here. We have some imported plants from Asia and China that we've planted in our landscapes. Our builders put them in. I'm embarrassed to tell you that I've got some in my yard that my builder put in. But what happens with some of these is that the birds eat the berries, they poop out the berries in our forests, and these plants are taking over our native forests. And they're taking over in such a way that our native plants are just getting crowded out and they're dying. And again, our wildlife just does not have access to them the way they used to. And then another reason why you should plant a native is to increase that habitat for the wildlife that's rapidly lost. I don't know about you, but I live in a new neighborhood that used to be a tobacco field, or maybe you live in a neighborhood that used to be a forest. And there were a lot of native plants that were taken away. So by planting natives in your yard, you're helping to balance that. We have a couple resources for you. Landscaping for Wildlife with Native Plants is a great resource. It has a comprehensive list of trees, shrubs, perennials, vines, etc. The trees are actually listed in height. I would encourage you to go to that resource if you're looking for natives, and you can then go to the database that we looked at earlier and find out more about those natives to see if they would work in your habitat, in your yard. The other one is NCSU's Going Native. I am going to go to that resource because I did speak to you a minute ago about the invasive plants that are changing our landscape here. So you as a consumer should be familiar with these plants so that you're not contributing to that invasive situation. There on the left, there is a list of these plants. You probably will recognize some of them. I do want to point out that we do have, let me find them here. We do have honeysuckle. This says Japanese honeysuckle. We do have a native honeysuckle and a native wisteria that is not invasive. But we all have seen those invasive wisterias in the spring, those big purple flowers hanging out that are just smothering the trees. So plant a native variety and you will not be contributing to that issue. Let's talk about best practices for planting woody ornamentals. Again, these things aren't cheap. So we're going to talk, and your time's not either. So let's talk about how you can plant them so that they live and they thrive and they grow and do well very long term. First, we're going to talk about timing. And when we talk about timing, we're going to talk about what time of year is the best time of year to plant these guys for their best success. The best time to plant here in North Carolina is the fall. And that's due to the fact that that will give the plants' roots time to acclimate and start to grow so that they can survive the winters and our heat in our summer. Usually we get more precipitation in the spring, fall, and winter. And newly planted trees and shrubs do need consistent watering the first year to be successful. And so if we're getting that precipitation, we don't have to be supplementing the water like we normally would need to be doing. Okay, preparation. We learned from Sabrina how important it is to do a soil sample. This is a great time. Evaluate that soil. Do you have a lot of sand and it's going to drain quickly and things are going to be dry? So, you know, maybe add some organic material like compost or soil conditioner to that soil to increase the air and the water retention. Let's talk about digging the hole. Oh, and let me just go back to preparation. So when you did your research on that plant, you're also going to find out, what does that plant like? Does it like more organic material? Does it like less? Does it like more sand? Does it like its feet wet? Does it like its feet dry? Those are the sort of things that you're going to plan ahead. And you can amend your soil to some extent, but sometimes you just have spots in the yard that are just not something that you can fix. So do be prepared for that plant that you're going to be planting there. Now we'll just talk about amendments just another minute. You don't, the thing that, the mistake some people make is that, and I worked at a gardening center and I'd see this all the time. People would buy these ornamentals and they would buy compost and soil conditioner that they thought was the best way to plant. So they're going to remove that soil and they think they're just going to just plant it in that amended soil, which would now be the organic compost and the soil conditioner. Studies show that that is not the best practice for planting woody ornamentals for long-term growth. They will grow well to begin with, but they will not grow well as soon as they hit that native soil in the side. You've kind of babied them a little too much. So when you dig that hole, you are going to retain that native soil. And the purpose of the preparing yourself is knowing what that plant needs. So you'll be able to amend it with those organic materials for what that plant needs. But you are going to mix it with that native soil because plants generally grow with their roots horizontal. And so that way they will still hit that native soil, but they'll be living in some native soil, so they'll be better to acclimate. Okay, so when you dig that hole, remember you're going to keep some of that native soil and you're just going to amend it with some organic materials that we talked about, and you are going to dig the hole to the depth of the soil line, whether it's a root ball like in a burlap bag or in a container. And the reason that you don't want to dig any deeper, if you dig too deep and you disturb the soil underneath where these roots are going to sit, you can actually create a pocket for water to sit. And some of our soils don't perk real well. And so you can actually have those roots just growing in water and it will kill the plant. Most trees and shrubs just don't want to be sitting in water all the time. So you want to dig that hole just to the depth of the soil line in the container or the burlap bag. And that hole needs to be dug 2 or 3 times as wide, because again, those roots are going to grow horizontally. That's how they will prefer to grow. They will eventually grow down, but they will get acclimated to that native soil. And that again is why you're going to retain some of that native soil and not just plant and just amendments. You're then going to remove any burlap bag, take it out completely. If there's a cage, take it out and just set that plant at the bottom of that hole that you dug, and it should be at the soil line again or just slightly above. You're going to make sure that it is facing the right way, the best way, like turn your plant around. Most plants have a side that looks better than others, and make sure it's straight. You're then going to attend to the roots. And when I talk about attending the roots, what I'm talking about is you're gonna you can take, I have it's called a hori-hori. It's kind of like a knife. When I plant a perennial, tree, shrub, whatever, I take that hori-hori and I really disturb those roots. I kind of cut them up a little bit. That root ball is not going to be the shape of that container I took it out of. And what you're doing is you're telling these roots, okay, you're free, grow, you've got all this space. You're really just giving them the message to just have at it, just go for it. And then you are going to refill that hole, and you're going to do that again with the removed soil that you've amended to the information that you've researched that plant is going to like best. You're then going to water it deeply and slowly. I like to use a slow, gentle stream on my garden hose. or a rain barrel. I have several rain barrels and I use those for watering my new woody ornamentals. But you want that water to be slow and steady. You don't want to stand there with a hose and blast it for 5 minutes. That just is runoff. That is not getting deeply to the roots. And that's what you want to do. You want to really saturate those roots so that you're giving them the life they need. I have a water meter that I bought from Amazon for 10 bucks. And I check my newly planted ornamentals, and if we're having drought, I check my other more established plants for some, for additional watering if that's needed. But these new guys, I have committed myself to watering them once a week, when we don't get precipitation. And I use my water gauge to tell me if they're dry. If they are, I get that hose out. I put the hose on it. I set my kitchen timer, or I have a timer on my watch. And I time 10, 15, 20, 30, up to 30 minutes for a tree, depending on the specimen. And I just move that. I take one day and I move that hose from place to place, because these guys really do need water the first year of their life. It really will contribute to success. And you don't want to spend money on these expensive things and then have them die. And then the last thing you're going to do is mulch. And the reason we mulch is that it does keep moisture in the soil. It helps suppress weeds. It keeps the roots cooler, and it encourages beneficial critters like Sabrina was talking about earlier. It brings those earthworms and all that great, all the bacterial organisms that our plants benefit from. It invites them into that environment to help them. That's all good stuff that's good for our plants. Do remember that you don't want to mulch too close to the trunk of a shrub or a tree. You want to keep the mulch back a few inches. Getting it too close can encourage diseases and funguses, and we don't want that to happen. And also remember that you never want to plant a tree and then mulch with that volcano effect, if you know what I mean, where the mulch is up the sides of the trunk of the tree. That is not healthy for the tree either. And I can say personally that I have had terrible soil in my yard. Again, it was an old tobacco field, but I've been able to improve the soil considerably just by mulching once a year. Has really just encouraged great beneficial critters, and has broken down the clay and the silt and the sand, and really my plants have thrived. So I encourage you to think about mulching. And then my last slide today, we're going to just talk about pruning trees and shrubs. We have a great publication, the North Carolina State University General Pruning Techniques. This could be one whole webinar in itself. And it can be a little scary to know how to properly prune, but this is a good resource. It gives you great pictures of what to do, what not to do. Once you get the foundations of pruning down, it's really very simple. And there's good reasons to prune, but let's talk about all of the reasons to prune. The first one is training. Maybe you want to do an espalier. Maybe you have a wall or a fence and you want to have something growing flat against it. Espalier is a beautiful gardening technique that can be quite pleasing. You may want to maintain the health of the plant. You can prune dead or diseased wood off of any plant at any time. There are certain considerations for pruning specific types of plants, like evergreens or hollies or boxwood. You want to prune those in the winter because when they're dormant, because pruning can also encourage growth, and you don't want to encourage growth in the winter. But when they're dormant, they will understand that you're taking off the excess and they will not grow. The other reason that you may want to prune is to improve the quality of a flower, fruit, foliage, or a stem. For instance, blueberries, they do need to be pruned for best berry production every year. Flowers, you have hydrangeas. One of the questions we often get is, I think I pruned my hydrangea incorrectly. I have no flowers this year. You need to know the type of hydrangea you have. Some flower on old wood, some flower on new wood. So knowing that information is beneficial. Use that database that I showed you to know exactly when the right time to prune those stems and those flowers are. Camellias is another one. Azaleas. Those are not things you want to prune in late winter or fall, because camellias and azaleas start to set up their flowers for the following year. So when those flowers are spent, that is the time to prune them. And then the last reason is to control growth. But don't be like me, because I am one of those people that I plant things too big for the site that I have. And so do your research. Know how big these specimens will get so that you're not having to prune the heck out of them or remove them later. And that's all I have for you today. Again, we are here to help you. If you have questions, we are here. Contact us. We love our research. We love helping you. That is why we're Extension Master Gardener Volunteers.
All right. Thank you so much, Sandy. And then thank you to everybody who presented today. I want to just take a minute to really thank them, because I wish y'all could have seen the hours and days that went into putting this presentation together, and all of the technical difficulties that we have had to overcome to get it to this point. We had planned to do this back in March, a face-to-face version, and you would have gotten some, hands-on take-home material. But of course, March, that's when COVID hit. So we had to transition to something online. And these ladies, they have knocked it out of the park, everything we've overcome to get to this point. Before we answer just the few questions that are hanging around, I wanted to again make note of the fact that you will receive an email with a PDF document of additional resources to explore. Some of those resources are the links that our group went over in their presentations today, and some are actually more in-depth publications and resources for you to look at if you just want to fall down a horticultural rabbit hole. Also, we are working on getting PDFs of these presentations put together and online for you to reference in the future. I do have a recording of today's meeting. Unfortunately, I think I started about 5 minutes late or so, so just a teeny bit of the beginning is missing. But of course, you should be able to get everything you need out of that recording. Additionally, when I send out that email, I will be emailing you an evaluation for the course. And it's not going to take very long to fill out at all. We just want to know if you were happy with the presentation, if you've learned anything from our presentations today, and what you may be interested in learning in the future. We definitely have other workshops planned, and if there's anything we could do to help you become better gardeners, that's what we want to do. I think that's everything I wanted to touch on. And we really only had just one question aside from, the additional resources. And that was about if squash borers live in the soil from season to season, and do we treat for that during the winter months? If you've ever had any kind of summer squash in your garden before, you have probably noticed a plant that just kind of suddenly collapsed, and you noticed holes in the stem, and that is a squash vine borer. Unfortunately, they can overwinter as pupa in the soil. If you were trying to control these in the wintertime, the best thing to do would be to till up your soil about 4 to 6 inches deep in the off season. If you want to treat with a chemical, you can use something organic such as spinosad, or you could use something synthetic such as bifenthrin, and you would treat with those when they are still eggs, because they are laid around April or May or so. If you have additional questions about when the eggs are being laid, you can reach out to me and I'll send you a publication on that. But you want to treat the eggs themselves rather than trying to treat the worms. Once they are getting into that worm caterpillar stage, the damage is probably already done, and there's not much you can do aside from that.
Can I say one thing, Selena? Wanda and I found a publication. We do have a demonstration vegetable garden, not right now, of course, because of COVID, but we
had that problem. And Wanda, I believe you found the publication, and I think you tried it or we tried it, that if you can find that borer, you can kind of dig it out of that vine and then put the soil back over where you dug it out. And sometimes if you catch it early enough, you can save that plant. But you do have to, that's one of those things, that's why it's important to be looking at your garden every day.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Sandy. That's excellent. Okay. Did you have a question, Joan?
I did have a question on vegetables, please. For those of us who might have very small veggie container gardens, and we can rotate, if you want a 4-year rotation, is one of the rotations going to be the left side of the 6-foot container, the right side?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and it's one we actually get a lot of questions about here at the Ag Center. If you're in one of these neighborhoods where you have a smaller lot size, you may only have like a 4x8 raised bed. And I've known a lot of people where the best thing they could do for a crop rotation, which means not planting the same plant in the same spot every year, is they would just shift it from one row to the next. Now that's not perfect, but it may be the closest you get. If you continue to have a lot of problems with one specific plant, like squash, for example, you may just need to go a year or two without it altogether. Now, if you could get some containers together and plant them in containers, that will help with your rotation. And also the containers can be sanitized after every season to kill off any pathogens that would be there. You could also use fresh potting soil in those containers every year, and that should greatly reduce any pest pressure you have. Are there any other questions really quickly? You could throw them in the chat if you do have any. And if there are no other questions, we will go ahead and sign off, and we ask that you please keep an eye on your inbox for additional information and the evaluation. And thank you so much for turning out today and for making our first virtual program such an awesome success. So
Thank you, everybody.
y'all have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.